Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are talking about experiential learning today, and so we hope that you find this valuable and will take time to participate in the discussion with us. So we did an update last time, but if you're new to us, we are a newer organization. We are officially a nonprofit organization as far as the state of Alabama is concerned. We are working on filing legal paperwork with the federal government to receive nonprofit status. So we are moving along there. We are hoping to have a fall forum in the fall. We will probably do that virtually out of safety and convenience for everyone. This will be our second fall forum that we have, and we are also hoping to elect officers next year so that more of our members can participate in planning these events and have some voice in what it is that we do here. Just to introduce you to who we are, there are 4 of us currently on the board who are working to get everything up and running. My name is Courtney Felton. Catherine Jarnigan, Crystal Mueller-Butler, and Courtney Garza are also board members, and we are doing the best that we can to help instructional designers throughout the state network and share ideas and learn ways that we can do our jobs better. So that is our purpose in being here. So we have 4 people with us today. Dr. Shannon Ash is the Simulation Educator and Lab Coordinator for the College of Health Sciences Experiential Learning and Simulation Center and serves as an Assistant Professor in the Ida Moffett School of Nursing at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. She is a certified athletic trainer and is licensed in the state of Alabama. Shannon earned her BS in Physiology from the University of Arizona, her MED in Sports Administration from Northwestern State University of Louisiana, and her EDD in Curriculum and Instruction from Liberty University. She has presented at local and regional conferences on constructing simulation experiences at various levels, as well as interprofessional education. She is currently in her 5th year of simulation. Mary Earley is an educator with 27 years experience in K-12 and 6 years experience in higher education. She currently serves as an education program specialist at UAB in the School of Education, where she manages a professional development grant from the U.S. Department of Education. And Mary deserves congratulations because she recently earned her master's degree in instructional design and development from UAB. We also have with us Allison Lewis, who is a senior instructional designer at the University of Alabama. She has been in that position for 7 years. Prior to that, she had 8 years of elementary education teaching experience and has been a small business owner for 15 years. She received her bachelor's degree in elementary education from the University of Alabama, her master's in interactive technology from the University of Alabama, and congratulations are also in order for her because she will be a grandmother in December. Finally, we have Dr. Patty Perez. She earned a bachelor's in science and physical therapy from the University of North Carolina in 1983, a post-professional Master of Science in Physical Therapy from UAB in 1993, and a Doctor of Science in Physical Therapy from UAB in 2011. She has been in clinical practice at UAB since 1983 and has been on faculty in the Department of Physical Therapy since 2004. Her teaching focus is PT management of musculoskeletal dysfunction in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program.
Have what was, I believe, the first telehealth simulation on campus. So that was kind of an exciting experience that caused a lot, or required a lot of us to figure out technology and coordination of resources. So I would say some of the struggles for me are still figuring out how to teach hands-on things when we can't be hands-on.
Right. So I want to talk more about that clinic simulation from your house and definitely hear more details about that. But Allison, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what your experience was and some issues that you came across?
I do, and I have a question for Patty. So do you think that y'all will do the telehealth simulation again the way you did it? I mean, is it something you think you could apply in future semesters?
Absolutely. And it was a pretty exciting thing to be a part of, because many of the other schools and programs were kind of waiting for us to work through it to see how it worked. So now quite a few other programs are actually using the same sort of model. So we feel like it was kind of an interesting and fun thing to figure out. And definitely, because we see healthcare changing to utilizing more telemedicine or telehealth, it will be a great way to train the students.
Okay.
Interesting.
Sounds wonderful. So I'm going to kind of play off a little bit of that, Patty. I'm not a teacher, but we do work with lots of instructors being a designer. And so the first thing we did as designers when the pandemic came along was reach out to all our people and say, hey, we're here. What can we do? You know, what challenges are you facing? Let us help. So I have 2 instructors that teach early childhood education, and they teach the distance class as well as the on-campus class. And they wrote me back immediately and said, oh, you won't be hearing from us. We've got it all figured out. I said, okay. I said, so please share. Well, you know, what are you doing? So in the early childhood classes, they do have to implement lesson plans. Well, you know, the school's all shutting down. They can't do that. So in the distance learn courses, they were using GoReact to film their lesson plan implementation. And then the instructors would give feedback through the video application. On campus, they would come directly to our Children's Development Center, where the instructors' offices are. So they just walk downstairs, and they had a lot of the, you know, face-to-face sitting in their lesson plan implementation. Okay, so, and I'm sure this was the case with many teachers who taught distance learn as well as face-to-face. They just rolled their on-campus students into the distance learn shell. And because GoReact was offering free sign-up for the summer, or at least through June at that time, their on-campus students immediately registered, created GoReact accounts. The course already existed, so all of that was pretty easy. But now they couldn't go, well, they could still write their lesson plans, but they could not go to the classroom to implement them. So what they did for the distance course, and I'm not sure if these were already in the face-to-face section or not, they had example lesson plans, and they had cleared those from prior students just for the distance learn students to see what happens. They didn't really have role models, and they wanted to make sure they had good role models before they implemented any lesson plans. So the on-campus students were watching our professionals. So the instructors knew they had good role models. Okay, so we ended up turning those videos into YouTubes, and they did video analysis assignments for the lesson implementations. So they kind of took what the instructors normally do. They take their rubric and they watch the videos and make their comments. So now the students were doing that for these lesson plan examples. And what they found is the students absolutely loved it. Some of them thrived on it because it meets kind of one of those learning styles, you know, and it's not just always doing it yourself, but watching someone else do it and then being able to make your comments on it. They plan to continue to have at least one of this style assignment when they if we ever get back to normal, just because it did offer them a different way of processing or viewing and reacting to a lesson plan implementation. They also are considering having the on-campus students use GoReact for all their lesson plan implementations, even though they're right upstairs, because the feedback is so valuable to leave at that timestamp. So they can stop the GoReact video, leave their comments, and then move on. So when they're sitting on campus face to face, sometimes they just can't write fast enough. They miss things because it's moved on. So I thought it was just interesting that some of the pandemic forced them to make some changes, and they actually like it. So that was one experience that particular group had. I also worked with some engineering instructors, and that was very interesting. They really worry about cheating. And, you know, one in particular only taught face-to-face, has never taught a distance course, and he really needed to understand how these exams were going to happen. And, you know, we had to remind him, these on-campus students did not sign up for a distance learn course. They don't have webcams. They may not have all the equipment. They may be going home to a rural area where they even have sketchy internet services. So it was interesting dissecting his exams with him. And we ended up just doing open book. I said, look, you know, let's do open book, make them longer, make them more detailed, whatever you need to do. But I said, you need to give away some of those thoughts that you have, and let's just make this work for this pandemic time. So that was interesting. And then two of the other engineering students are developing with us for the first time. And I've had several interesting meetings with them. I'm not sure my brain and their brain work on the same sides. So it's been challenging to make them understand how we need this content and how it works. But after this pandemic, those two guys were like, I get it. I understand now. I know what you need, and I know why you need it and how you need it. So that was interesting to me, that forcing them into an online situation made them realize what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So that's really all I have to share right now.
Thank you. Mary, I wanted to bring you in because you also are in education at UAB. So do you want to talk a little bit about your experience and maybe some of the similarities and differences you had in some of the things that Allison said?
Okay, yes. So I work with the ESL Teacher Education Program, and it's a master's program. So our students are certified teachers, but they're getting a master's in ESL education and initial certification in ESL. So they have to do an internship. And since they're teachers, the way our program is structured is they do a 2-week internship in the summer where they teach ESLs in an ESL camp for 2 weeks in the summer. And we have several partnering school districts that have the ESL camps. Of course, they're usually face-to-face, but one of the issues is this is the last course that our candidates take. These candidates for this summer were scheduled to graduate in August, and they needed to do their internship. We only do the internship in summer, so if they couldn't graduate in August, they had to wait a whole other year, which was just not feasible or fair to them. So when all this came about in March, where we realized that there was not going to be any face-to-face ESL camp, so we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to give those opportunities for our students to get their internship completed. So we started having Zoom meetings with our partner school districts, their ESL teams, their administrators. And so what we ended up, 2 of our large school districts did have virtual ESL camps that have hundreds of students attending, and we were able to place interns with cooperating teachers with them, but it was still a lot of finagling to get everything set up. But we also have some of our smaller school districts that they were not going to do a virtual. They did not have the resources to do a virtual ESL camp. So working with them and our interns, these interns for one of our small districts in North Alabama are actually employees in that school district. So they are actually teaching a 2-week learning experience. And when we say 2 weeks, we mean they usually meet 4 days a week. So that's 8 days of instruction. So they can spread that out throughout the summer if they need to now in their virtual environment. So I observed one of our interns last week she is teaching a unit on natural disasters to a family of children. There are 3 children in that family, and she has had to go to their house and show them how to get connected. And so twice a week, she does her virtual lesson, they connect, and she teaches these two sisters and a brother, and they're learning together in this unit. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a virtual classroom where 20 or 30 English learners are virtually entering into the classroom. Most of them are the school districts are using Google Meet, because that's what the school districts use, the K-12 use. So the students are able to log in, and the teachers are providing virtual instruction. And one of the neat things is what they have packets of materials that they have gotten out to the students that they will need to do the activities and the hands-on activities that they've been able to do in virtual learning. So that was a real challenge. We weren't sure how that was going to come about, but it has worked beautifully with the collaboration of our UAB team and our school district partners and our interns to get this together and to teach our English learners virtually. And another challenge was, as you can imagine, some of our English learners do not have the technological resources at home to log into a virtual environment. So some of them we know have been left out because they just didn't have the resources to be able to join the classes.
That's interesting. I want to talk more about that that later when we talk more about some of the issues with technology that you guys witnessed. But Shannon, talk to us a little bit about what your experience was like.
Well, when we went off for spring break, we got the news while we were on spring break that we weren't coming back, at least for a time period. And as things started happening, we kind of knew that that was going to be longer than just that time period. And so with the breadth of our different programs, they had quite a bit of experiential learning planned for the rest of the semester. Most of our initial skills for those that were going into their clinicals were already taught by spring break, and then they were going to be going out to their clinicals. So the complication was what happens when they're not allowed to go to their clinical sites, what happens when we don't allow them to go to their clinical sites. And so we converted a lot of that into case studies and virtual sims that were already in existence. There's a couple of programs out there that are heavy for nursing, so that was already designed. We already had the licensure for that. For pharmacy, we have EHR Go, and there's a lot of case studies within that, and then additional things that we could add to it. So they could be able to work through their patient cases there and work through documentation. And then speech had SimuCase, and one of ours that was kind of left out was physical therapy. And that has been an interesting development since then, because they had a lot of inpatient simulations that were scheduled for the rest of the semester with our standardized patients. And so we record everything in our center, and we have the past 3 years available even when we're remote. And so the nice thing was we could pull up some of those previous recordings, and everybody's already signed that, you know, we can use any of these recordings for educational needs. So we were able to go back and look at some of the previous videos. If we couldn't find a video in existence that really targeted towards one of the professions that maybe doesn't have as much out there, we were able to utilize those, download those videos, and upload them onto, we use Canvas. So that was nice to be able to take them through a scenario, then be able to generate some questions, discussion, and almost have kind of a debriefing with our students on a simulation that they observed as opposed to a simulation that they were in. And so they worked through those for some of those larger scales. And then for skills, similar to Patty, I know for physical therapy, our individual professors did take videos of themselves and work through kind of, here's what mobilizations look like, here's what manipulations are. And I know that for our nursing, for some of the entry-level students working on assessments, and for pharmacy, the same thing, they had them kind of doing almost a head-to-toe assessment either on themselves or on another person in their house. And then kind of going through that, doing videos, because our nursing students, they had not gotten far enough yet to be able to take their assessments. So they actually recorded it and downloaded it onto Canvas. So we've used a few different mediums to be able to communicate directly with our students for their various, either with their skills or when it's more communication based, trying to do Zoom calls, trying to do things through WebEx. And as it looks like, there will still be some version of blended learning, I'm going to say, going on, because we're still kind of in a question of how all of this is going to go on. We have plans for larger scales, similar to what Patty discussed, simulations with our standardized patients through WebEx that then record into our learning management system. So trying to continue to at least allow them to do their critical thinking, their communication-based, experiential learning, and be able to record it so we can give them that immediate feedback. And similar, I think it was Allison was talking about, they found out that they really enjoyed that immediate feedback. They've seen that a lot on the floor when they've done recordings and had the faculty go and put notes at specific points, and then the students have access to those videos. And so it was nice because they were able to use that again, that same technology. So yeah, they've noticed that that's been helpful as well.
So you mentioned a lot of technologies. Were those things that you already had access to, were already using, or were these things that you had to find and plug in kind of quickly?
All of the above. We have our learning management system and our AV system in our simulation center is fairly robust, and it has the opportunity to make recordings and to house those recordings and to release recordings. Immediately when the pandemic really started shutting things down, the company that puts it together actually came in and added a few new features specifically for virtual learning, and brought in this new platform where you can do a virtual simulation and it can record directly to that system. You can do your own videos and you can download it into the system, so then the faculty can go ahead and make comments, and the students will be able to see it. And then the other virtual simulations that are out there, whether it's skill-based, communication-based, or case studies, we had EHR Go. It's a electronic health record, but it's more of a educational based, and it has within it case studies already. And so some of our programs had already been using it as that, and we just kind of had to ramp it up for the end of the semester. We had VSIM. Again, only certain programs were using it. And so we all kind of, the one wonderful thing that's happened during this pandemic is people have been willing to share. And they're not holding things close to their bodies anymore. They're like, okay, hey, we did this. You want to try it? And they're telling them how they did it. And it's been phenomenal. And then there's been a few that we've found. SimuCase, we did have a connection to through our speech program, but we didn't even really realize it until we started playing with it for the physical therapy, because they just added that in. And Body Interact is another one where it's a virtual sim with a screen-based avatar, and you can go through all of the clinical decision making for any of our professions, and it's really interesting. And they actually released some free samples so that you could work with a few patients and see if you enjoyed it, see if you wanted to work with that. There was a lot of companies that did that, which was nice.
Yeah, I noticed that too. A lot of companies that responded by making a lot of resources available that for free that were not typically for free. So I'm interested in kind of this contrast of this highly simulated, using lots of different technologies and plugging in the simulation experiences, to Patty setting up a Zoom meeting in her house to model this clinic. So Patty, will you talk to us in a little bit more detail on what that looked like and how you did that?
Yeah, it was rudimentary at best. It's, kind of the poor man's version of simulation, if you will. But I found that when we transitioned, because, our students are on campus from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. They are with each other all day, every day, while they're on campus. So this quick shift to remote learning was and still is a bit of a struggle for a cohort who's used to being together. And so what I found is that it was very hard for me to know if they were staying engaged. Very difficult. And so the only way I knew to make it interesting was to try to recreate some of the things I would be doing in a clinic. And so I had a treatment table up there, and I used the polling feature in Zoom a lot to kind of pose questions. And so they would answer, and then I would kind of say, okay, well, talk me through this. Somebody said you would do this technique. So describe to me how you would position the patient on the table. And I would hop up on the table, and they would have to talk through it so that the rest of the group could see it. Or if it was an exercise, they had to talk me through the exercise. And I played like I was the most body unaware patient possible. So they really did have to think, and that part of it I felt like they enjoyed. When it was just me trying to ask questions and get them to answer, because again, this was new to me as well.
Right.
It went over like a lead balloon. So I had to be creative. So I was constantly, Shannon, you'll laugh about this because Andrea Bowen and I had a conversation. She's on the PT faculty at Samford. So at the time I wasn't cleared to be on campus. And so I would call the chair of my department and say, David, I need a skeleton with ribs. Can you bring a skeleton with ribs to my house? And he would just leave it on my front porch. So that because I live by myself. So I would use a skeleton to demonstrate hand placements or things like that. So I had all kinds of exercise equipment. And it was great to sort of show them the challenges of being able to use your webcam to get a good view, which was kind of the struggle they had with the telehealth simulation. Was they kind of would demonstrate something, but the patient couldn't see what they were demonstrating. So that was what it looked like, if you will. It was nothing very sophisticated, but it was a little bit more engaging for them, I think.
And I think it's interesting that there are ways that we can do things that are simulation based and very effective, and then ways that are, that can also be very effective. And I think that it was probably also beneficial for them to see and maybe experience some frustration of you being awkward and not, body aware at all, and having to figure out ways to overcome that. Versus a simulation that may be a little bit more friendly to what they're telling them to do and responding to that. So I think that's interesting, and both equally valid approaches and effective approaches. So I want to talk to Allison and Mary a little bit more too about technology. I know we've talked about GoReact a little bit. Zoom, I think, is the key to a lot of people's success. Were there other technologies that your faculty or people that you worked with, and the Google Meet, but other technologies that you found to be effective or enabled you to make these things happen? And what, in working with faculty and students, what did they respond the most to?
Well, I'll start. So we've recently adopted Panopto in Blackboard. And what the pandemic did was force everybody to try it and use it. So we were all learning together on the Panopto, and it ended up being a great resource for the instructors to record lectures and that kind of thing. And actually, when our development so we have our own media team that works with the instructors when they develop online courses with us. So they come to a studio to record. Well, obviously that wasn't happening, and we had to get their courses ready for summer regardless. Most of them went to Panopto and recorded in our development shell, and media team was able to pull it from there. So that was a great tool in itself, because it was all within Blackboard and made it easy for all parties involved to get the lecture recording for us to continue to develop with. Now, the student side of Panopto is offering us a few more challenges. And matter of fact, I'm studying that right now as well, just to understand more of what the students will see how it's uploaded, how user-friendly it is. We didn't have, well, in my area, we didn't have a lot of the student side of it during the pandemic. And I think partly it's because the instructors hadn't used it enough to understand the student side and didn't have time to figure it out. You know, let's just make this work and let's see what we need to do and get it done.
Now, is
So-
that issues with them viewing with what was put in Panopto?
No, that's not an issue for the students, but sometimes they want them to record something.
I see.
And that side of it, you know, they didn't know how to tell the students to do that, and finding the tutorials that go along with that. So that was kind of, they just kind of stayed away from that. You know, if they had a presentation to turn in, they could not use, but they didn't want to use Panopto as an option just because they didn't know enough about the student side. And sometimes discussions, they love to do video discussions.
Mm-hmm.
We've been very successful with a tool called Flipgrid,
Mhm.
and it's embedded directly in the Blackboard page, and they see, you know, all the little squares, and they can communicate that way. And the instructors that are invested with the tool love it. Now, there are a few transfer from shell to shell issues that we have to take care of, and that's known up front. But the courses that already had that embedded were fine. I don't think they had any technology issues with it going down or anything like that. But, you know, when the pandemic starts, you can't just throw all these new tools at them because they don't have time to learn them and time to experiment with it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that was kind of our new thing that we were forced to use Panopto, and we're all glad of it because it is in Blackboard. And when our students are enrolled in distance learn courses, if the tool is a feature of Blackboard, our tech support will help them. If the tool is not a feature of Blackboard, those students have to rely on the tech support of that tool, like Flipgrid for one. So that's beneficial for us too if we master Panopto, because then our students can call our tech support, internal tech support, for help.
And you bring up a good point. We kind of mentioned this last week. We talked about it a lot, that idea of this switch was a switch to remote learning, and everybody all of a sudden is going to be an online teacher who knows how to teach online effectively. It's what do we have to do to get this done as effectively as possible, given the limited amount of knowledge that some people have and not time to learn new things. So next week we're going to talk about training and experiences with having to try to train faculty to get them able to use the tools that they needed to use to teach remotely effective. Mary, what about you? What technologies and issues and things like that did you experience?
Well, one of the things that we really stress in our program is peer-to-peer interaction and small group discussions, and for our teachers to design instruction that has embedded in it opportunities for their students to use all 4 domains of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So that's been one of the biggest challenges. They've been able to screen share, and they've used short videos, they've used PowerPoints, but getting the students involved in the discussions, because during the lesson presentation, they have to ask all the students to mute, because you can imagine the background noise when you have 20 students, most of them on the background. And so just the students maneuvering that, going back and forth between mute and unmute, and being willing to speak up. Apparently the breakout feature in Google Meet is not quite as, doesn't work quite as well as the one we're used to in Zoom. Some of the teachers have tried that. When they are sharing their screen, they can't see the faces of the students. So they're sharing the screen to present and to talk, but they can't gauge the interaction of the students or, you know, the facial expressions, because they can't see them while they're in present mode. But they have done relatively well considering the circumstances. There have been a few students that have been willing to speak up because we, as the UAB staff, we've had to go in and observe their lessons. So we've actually had to go into these virtual classrooms. So that's, we're getting to see what's going on. And then of course, the one I was telling about earlier, that she has 3 children sitting at the same table. So in that lesson that I observed, there was a lot of opportunity for the children to interact with each other, to talk, and for her teacher to interact with them because they're in the same room. But when in a situation like we're in now, it's difficult when you have children who don't have that virtual experience to be able to have that peer-to-peer interaction in those small group discussions.
Yes, will you talk about that for a moment? You said that there were some people who were not able, some students that were not able to participate because they did not have the capability to attend virtually. Do you know what was done for them so that they had access to resources?
Well, in one of the districts that we were going to work with, they have, I think it's called a one-to-one device where they have the devices at school. So in that district, that was a high school. So the students who wanted to participate could come to the school and check out the device that they needed to be able to participate. And so, but then you still have to have them come to the school, check out the materials. And for some of them, that just wasn't an option, or they weren't comfortable doing that. And one of the school districts actually is paying to using some of their funds to provide some Wi-Fi in areas where they know is low on Wi-Fi, where children need to be able to access it. So that's the school districts are really going the extra mile to get that out there. But we do know that there are some students who are not participating because they don't have an adequate device or they don't have adequate Wi-Fi to be able to join.
And I'm curious about, and I know most of us are higher ed, so this is a little bit off topic, but I'm curious, and when access and equality is such a conversation that we're having today in education and in society in general, I'm curious about how that equity kind of plays out in this pandemic. So I know, for example, one of my best friends teaches in a school district. She's doesn't teach, she's an assistant principal now. And they had to create paper packets and mail them to students to make sure that students at least had access to some sort of instructional materials. And so I'm curious to see how that is going to play out in achievement and preparation for next semester, the next year, to see how that affected growth and things like that. Have you had any experience with that, and or kind of the alternatives that these students had who just did not have that access? Were they just left to their own to say, you know, we hope your parents can provide some resources for you, or if there are other alternatives?
The summer program is supplemental and it's extra. So that we did in our planning with our school districts, we acknowledged the fact that of this equity issue, and we know that there were some children that were being left out because they simply did not have the resources to access. But during the school year, I know that the school districts, like you said, were making the packets. One of the school districts actually made home visits, that some of the ESL teachers and the ESL central office people went all over the community taking the backpacks of supplies that students would need to participate in this experience. So even if they ended up only participating once or twice, they still had this backpack of supplies that they would need and that they can use when school starts again.
That's great to hear that communities are making that effort. So we're getting kind of close on time, so I want to move looking forward and looking back at the same time. So I have 2 kind of final questions for you, and if there's anything else that anybody who's watching would like to ask, please feel free to drop that in the chat. So the first question is, what would you like to have done differently if you had the opportunity? And then the second question is looking toward fall. Some of you mentioned some things that you want to include anyway, even when we're back to normal and everything is back to the way that it was pre-pandemic. But what is fall kind of looking like for you now, and what are you hoping to be able to include in the fall? So What would you have done differently, and what kind of is fall looking like for you? Shannon, will you go first and kind of share those thoughts?
Differently, it would have been nice to, I guess, have a little extra time to explore some of these virtual options prior to, so that when they first came to us, we've already got these, let me look for you, let me try to find it. I could have given it to them immediately. I mean, we could look and we could find things, but that meant that I had to play with each one of them beforehand before I gave it to them to figure that out. And looking forward into the fall, I'd love to say it's going back to normal, but I know it's not right away. And so one thing we are doing is being a lot more intentional about making sure that the teaching part, the didactic part, really does happen prior to lab interactions. So you can focus more on the true hands-on skills while they have maybe smaller amounts of time. Just taking the opportunity. I think that now one thing that everyone has learned, is that the hands-on is huge. It's a big portion of it clicking, kids getting it, and being a little bit more intentional about making sure that that time is fully meaningful, making sure that they have done their reading beforehand, so that we get into the lab, we can jump into it, that we really can go ahead and do small group interactions. And when you're learning skills, practice with a lot of immediate feedback, and have that ready for them, and have a way to have that ready for them. So we've really been ramping that portion of it up. And also looking at, this has also made them realize the importance of objectives in experiential learning. You know, a lot of times we just have them put their hands on things because it's cool. And it's a pedagogy. We've got to follow objectives to make sure that those are going to be met. It's not just an experience just to have an experience. And so how can we be more specific about that and really come at it with, we need these objectives? Because if it's communication based, we might be able to do that virtually and be able to save everybody a little bit more time, maybe make it more efficient. How can we do that better? And that's what the fall is looking a lot like, is that we're being more intentional about being efficient, using time, using resources better, which, considering we've grown in more programs over the last year that are all going to be using space more, I guess it couldn't have happened at a better time to really force everyone to focus on being more intentional, paying more attention to how we're doing things. So
Yeah, I love that use of the word intentional, and making sure that what you're doing is intentional, which is the purpose of instructional design, is to have intentional design plannings. So yeah, that's great. Allison, what about you? What would you like to have done differently, and what does fall look like so far?
You know, since I'm not an instructor, I kind of put a different spin on everything, but Crystal and I are actually working on a Blackboard tips and tricks for our instructors. And it's a lot of the features of Blackboard that maybe we use on the design side that they're not as knowledgeable about, or maybe it's parts of the grade book that they just really have never experimented with and didn't understand that existed, or all kinds of little things. And this would have been a great time for them to have that tips and tricks, to get in there for some shortcuts, or, oh, I don't know how to do that, and I can't get in touch with anybody, and look on our list and see if it's there. So maybe this will spur us on to finish it and be able to offer, you know, our instructors some of those features that we use that they never had a reason to.
And I think that those just-in-time resources where they can go and putting a repository, so that if they can't reach out to an instructional designer or a technologist to say, how do I do this? Mm-hmm. They have those repositories available. So I've heard several people mention that, so I appreciate that.
Working efficiently too, you know,
right.
Some of it would save them some time, and you know, efficiency means a lot.
Absolutely. So fall, other than developing this these resources for them. Allison, what else would you say about fall? What do you think fall looks like?
Well, you know, and I can only comment on some of the instructors that I do communicate with, and we do have open relationships with many of them. I'm thinking some of them are going to be a little better prepared for this kind of situation if it happens again. It's made them stop and think about the content and material in their course and how it's applied and other ways that maybe they could do it differently or more effective, or maybe some of the face-to-face instructors are really going to think about the distance, the online opportunities, and maybe ways they're not using Blackboard right now in their courses that they should be, instead of depending on everything, you know, like having those lectures. If they've already recorded some lectures because of the pandemic, those could be resources that they could list continuing into their next course. So having some of those things already available may make them think, you know, about how their course is set up, especially for the face-to-face instructor. We know quite a few face-to-face instructors that don't depend on Blackboard at all. I mean, their grades, and that's only because the university requires it. So I would hope that they would find a better use for Blackboard in their courses and have be better prepared for these types of occasions. So.
And I think that in my experience working with faculty, they've become a lot more flexible in being willing to have things that are online but could be used face-to-face as well, and kind of seeing the value in having those things, even if they are face-to-face, in whatever their learning management system is, so that that transition is a little bit.
Well, listen, they were forced to be flexible during this pandemic. I mean, they didn't have choice. You know, they were, lots of things were thrown at them, and they had to just stop and process and think.
Yeah.
And that was good too, because so many of them get stuck in their routine, and their mindset is one way, this is how it's done. So this pandemic, some of those processes didn't work at all. They had to make some changes, and some found out they liked that. They liked those changes. So I don't know. We'll see, and we'll hopefully that they will go into their courses and try to be better prepared with some backup in Blackboard, if nothing else, for the face-to-face courses.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Patty. What about you, other than apparently keeping a skeleton in your house from now on?
I have multiple ones, actually. I'll probably echo a lot of what Shannon said. So looking back, what do I wish? I wish I had more knowledge about other platforms or other options that were out there. But I've been very grateful for our instructional design team, who has been very responsive and always have helped me problem solve through things. So that was really great. Looking forward, because of the fact that our cohorts are so large and we're anticipating needing to still maintain social distancing guidelines, while our lab space is big, we're probably going to have to go to split labs. So teaching the same material twice, which is a lot of time. So didactically, we will continue to do remote learning. And so trying to kind of continue to enhance that and utilize unique ways to keep the students engaged, and then learn how to be good at teaching the same thing twice in labs.
Okay, Mary?
Well, one thing that has come up with our interns, they have all expressed that they were very fortunate to have this experience, because now they think they have preparation for going forward in the fall. If they have to do virtual instruction in the fall or in the future, they now have had some experience doing it in a situation that was not as high pressure as maybe in their job in the school system. So they have really responded well to that.
Excellent. So we're running short on time, so I want to thank you all so much for participating, panelists, and for people who came today to listen to this conversation. I think it's been great to hear the experiences that people have had, and to know that experiential learning opportunities were able to continue even in the face of what we were dealing with. And so I'll just remind you before we go that our third and final session of our summer mini-series is next Friday, and we are going to be talking about training and how we trained faculty and ways that we were able to train faculty to teach remotely very quickly, and some of the things that we'll take forward and do differently next time. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope you'll come with us. See us next time. And if you have not connected with us, please check out our social media and contact information and follow us and keep participating in these conversations. So thank you all. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.